I made the decision to quit my job, bringing the secret affection I had harbored for years to a deliberate and final end. It had taken me 5 long years to climb the ladder from a junior assistant to become Isabella Rossi's chief secretary, and then another 3 years to make myself so completely indispensable that her entire professional life revolved around my efforts. In the end, after all that time and dedication, it only took me 5 minutes to compose my resignation letter and a single, decisive second to submit it. When I presented the letter, Isabella's brow furrowed just slightly. She looked up at me with a calm, unreadable expression and asked the question I had been dreading. "Give me a reason." I found myself unable to meet her gaze, forcing a smile that I hoped appeared sincere. "Isabella, I'm 30 now," I began, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I've reached an age where I feel I should start thinking about settling down and building a life." After a brief pause, I added the lie I had carefully constructed to ensure my departure would be accepted without further questioning. "My girlfriend proposed to me recently." Isabella's fingers began to drum a soft, rhythmic pattern on the polished surface of her desk, a subtle but clear sign of her deep frustration. I suppose I should have felt some sense of gratitude that my leaving warranted even this small display of emotion from her. After a long moment of silence, she pushed my resignation letter back across the desk toward me. "I can approve a marriage leave for you," she offered, her voice even. "I hope you'll reconsider quitting." For a fleeting moment, I hesitated. A small voice in the back of my mind urged me to accept, to say yes, just so I could still be near her, to still see her every day. But another, more realistic voice immediately cut through the temptation, warning me sternly, "Leo, she's getting engaged. It's not right to carry a torch for a woman who is about to be married." My hands hovered in the air, caught between taking the letter back and letting it lie. Ultimately, I couldn't bring myself to retrieve it. "This job is incredibly demanding," I explained, my voice soft. "After getting married, I want to focus more of my energy on my family. I'll ensure a smooth handover of all my responsibilities." I added an apologetic note to my tone. "I'm sorry, Isabella." With that, she said nothing more, her expression returning to its usual professional mask. "Understood," she replied softly. "Congratulations on your wedding." Before I had even fully exited her office, Isabella had already immersed herself back in her work, a clear signal that to her I was merely a subordinate, perhaps the most reliable one she'd ever had, but a subordinate nonetheless. That day I sat at my desk, my gaze fixed on a small potted plant on the corner, completely lost in thought. This was a rare luxury for me. My typical workday was a whirlwind of activity, a constant juggling act of managing schedules and serving as Isabella's all-hours personal assistant. My phone was perpetually on, a lifeline that had to be answered at any time of day or night. Whenever Isabella needed me, for any reason, I had to be there instantly, often performing the duties of several people at once. Of course, the compensation for this round-the-clock dedication was a substantial salary, enough to grant me complete financial freedom over the years. It took several calls from my colleague Daniel to finally pull me from my reverie. "Leo," he said, "Isabella wants you to go ahead and begin setting up for the party tonight." The event was a welcome home party for Sophia Laurent, who had just returned from a period of studying abroad. The guest list was exclusive, limited to the tight-knit circle of Isabella's closest associates, the young, powerful elite from the city's most prominent families. They were a lofty and wealthy group with impossibly high standards, and under normal circumstances, they wouldn't welcome an outsider into their fold. However, I had proven myself too useful to be excluded. They needed someone who could flawlessly organize an event, catering to every individual's specific tastes and preferences. When I arrived at the venue, I immediately dove into the preparations, overseeing everything from the food and drinks to the snacks, meticulously ensuring that everyone's personal preferences were accounted for. The lilies had to be removed because someone had an allergy. The lights needed to be dimmed because another guest had recently undergone eye surgery. I made sure a specific blend of tea was ready for brewing. As dusk settled and the evening began, the guests started to arrive. Chloe Sterling was the first to walk in, greeting me with a familiar smile. "When is Isabella getting here?" she asked. I checked my watch and gave her a carefully calculated answer. "She has another meeting this evening. She'll probably be here in about an hour." Chloe flopped onto a nearby couch, looking exhausted, with dark circles visible under her eyes. I gestured for the staff to lower the music volume and brought her a soft blanket. "The nights are getting chilly this time of year," I said. "They'll be here soon. Try to get a short break." She chuckled, gathering the blanket around herself and giving me a playful look. "Are you sure you wouldn't consider leaving Isabella to come and work for me? I'll double whatever she's paying you." People like Chloe were so accustomed to having others fawn over them that my professional, unassuming demeanor made me a novelty. Since I didn't stand to gain anything from them personally, our interactions were always genuine, which in turn had earned me their respect. I played along with her jest, smiling back. "I'll keep that in mind if I ever find myself in a tough spot. I hope you'll still have a place for me then, Chloe." As the night deepened and the streetlights outside cast a warm glow, the room gradually filled up. Isabella arrived last, wearing a chic black coat that seemed to carry a hint of the crisp autumn air inside with her. As I took her coat, the thought crossed my mind that this might be the very last time I would perform this simple act for her. Once everyone was settled with drinks in hand and a comfortable atmosphere had been established, I found the right moment to make my announcement. I stood up to offer a toast, feeling the weight of the occasion. "I've been graciously looked after by everyone here for a long time," I began, my voice steady. "I'm leaving. I know I wasn't always the perfect assistant and often caused my fair share of trouble, and I sincerely appreciate all of your patience with me through the years. I hope our paths will cross again. Someday." Perhaps it was the melancholic feeling of the autumn season, but a quietness fell over the table, a shared sense of impending departure. Chloe was the one to break the silence, raising her glass toward me with a wry smile, attempting to lighten the mood. "You know, initially I was sure you had ulterior motives with Isabella. Now I can finally see I was mistaken." Everyone at the table understood the unspoken reference in her words. Several of Isabella's past assistants had been summarily fired after confessing their romantic feelings for her. Eventually, she had made it a policy to only hire female assistants, but even that hadn't stopped the confessions, which had earned Isabella the charming but troublesome title of a heartbreaker. Someone chuckled and gently nudged Isabella's shoulder. "I can't believe someone actually managed to escape your allure." Isabella retorted with a playful smile. "Get out of here." After dinner, a group of them started a card game to pass the time. Midway through a hand, Chloe casually asked Isabella, "So, have you met the man your grandfather picked out for you?" At her words, my heart skipped a beat, and my hand froze in midair, the water pitcher I was holding suspended over a glass. After a moment that felt like an eternity, Isabella answered nonchalantly, "No, let the old man have his way. Marrying one person isn't much different from marrying another." In their world, marriage was often a business transaction, the outcome of countless strategic considerations and negotiations. Although they enjoyed a life of unmatched resources and privilege, they paid a steep price for it. It was clear that Isabella had long ago accepted these unwritten rules. I had met Julian Thorne once before. He seemed like a genuinely good person. If it were at all possible, I would have hoped for Isabella to find a different kind of life, one separate from the cold transactions of her peers. The dinner party continued late into the night. A driver was waiting outside to take people home as soon as the event concluded, but Isabella's driver had a minor incident on the way, causing a delay. This left me in a situation I deeply disliked, being alone with her. We stood side by side under the soft glow of a streetlight, our shadows stretching long on the pavement in the night air. Whenever these moments of quiet intimacy occurred, all the resentful and dark thoughts I tried so hard to suppress would start bubbling up to the surface of my mind. Isabella, of course, knew nothing of this. She just stood there silently, her usual sharp edges softened slightly by the wine she'd had. After a while, her car finally arrived. She glanced at me and asked politely, "Want a ride?" I shook my head, managing a grateful but reserved smile. "Thanks, Isabella, but my fiancée is already on her way to pick me up." With that, Isabella just nodded slightly, got into her car, and drove away, leaving me standing there alone at last. The many masks I wore throughout the day could finally come off. I loosened my tie and sat down on a stone planter, feeling a rare and profound sense of confusion. For a brief instant, I had no idea where I was supposed to go. Not long after, a light drizzle began to fall. The first autumn rain of the season, cold and dreary against my skin. I started walking along the road. This was a wealthy neighborhood, and it took a long walk to reach a spot where I could realistically catch a cab. Unfortunately, the route I typically used was under repair. Isabella never expected to see me again that night, standing there in the rain, swaying slightly on my feet. She was a bit surprised, not accustomed to seeing the perpetually composed Leo Vance reveal a more vulnerable, laid-back side. After all, at work, no matter the occasion, I was always in a sharp suit, buttoned up to the collar. She had seen countless men loosen their ties and lean in towards her, but I was different. That was one of the reasons she valued me so highly, not just for my professional skills, but because I understood and respected boundaries. As her car passed by me, her driver asked, "Should we give him a lift?" Isabella's eyes remained fixed ahead as she simply replied, "No need." Her opinion of my supposed fiancé was not a favorable one. She thought I was intelligent, but it seemed I had made a poor choice in a partner. Still, she believed feelings were a personal matter, like drinking water, only you know if it's hot or cold. She had no desire to interfere. I wasn't entirely sure if I saw Isabella's car drive by. Perhaps it was just a blur in the rain, or maybe I was mistaken. This area probably didn't have many people like me, trying to hail a cab in the middle of the night. It took so long for a taxi to finally arrive that my legs started to feel numb from standing. By the time I finally got home, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. The house was completely silent. Outwardly, I had constructed a narrative for everyone that I had a happy, fulfilling life, a loving fiancé, a supportive family, and a wide circle of friends. People would often look at me with a touch of envy, remarking on how perfect my life seemed. But the truth was, I had nothing. No family, no love, no real friends. When I was in middle school, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was already in the late stages. After surgery, it returned within 6 months. One ordinary morning, my father left for work and simply never came back. He took all of the family's savings with him, leaving behind my sick mother and his teenage son. My mother was strangely calm when she heard the news. She silently endured her chemotherapy treatments and long hospital stays, occasionally finding the strength to make meals for me when she felt up to it. One evening, I came home from school to find a table full of my favorite dishes. My mother was sitting across from me, smiling. For some reason, I was filled with an unexplainable sense of fear. I could smell something strange in the food, and my mind immediately went to the new bottle of rat poison I had seen in the bathroom. That day I discovered that my mother's grip was incredibly strong, so strong that I couldn't break free. In a desperate bid for survival, I managed to break away from her and somehow ended up on the rooftop of our apartment building. My mother, crying, opened her arms to me, saying incoherently, "The world is such a bad place. I can't leave you here all alone. Come with Mommy. In the next life we'll still be mother and son." I was crying too. I was so tired, and I missed the comforting scent of laundry detergent that always lingered on her clothes. Maybe for a moment I thought it wasn't worth living anymore. The wind on the rooftop that night was strong, but my mother's hug was so warm. She held my hand and moved slowly toward the edge. At the very last moment, I was grabbed by a pair of thin but strong hands. She held on tightly, despite my struggles. In the wind, all I could see was a pair of incredibly bright eyes. I survived, but my mother did not. The person who saved me was Isabella. She not only saved my life, but also gave me a reason to live. In my desperation to repay her, I felt as though I had betrayed my mother. I was like a drowning person clinging to a piece of driftwood, and Isabella was that driftwood. Later, as the fire trucks, police cars, and ambulances arrived, I clung to her hand in the crowd, looked up at her, and asked, "How can I repay you?" I still remember the 16-year-old Isabella looking down at me and saying seriously, "Then come and find me." My life felt as though it was stuck on that night my mother died, and Isabella became my only source of hope. That night, as was often the case, I was swallowed by dreams filled with events from my past. My mother questioned me, asking why I didn't leave with her, and I saw the silent, defeated look on my father's face before he walked out of our lives forever. I woke up drenched in sweat, my throat so tight I couldn't produce a sound. My temperature was 101.8 degrees. Normally, I would just take some medicine and carry on as if nothing was wrong. But this time, I surprisingly decided to take a day off. I needed some time to think about my future, to figure out what path I was supposed to take now. When Isabella arrived at the office, she discovered that I wasn't there. She asked around and learned I had called in sick. She frowned, her already low opinion of my so-called fiancé dropping even further. Daniel, the assistant secretary, temporarily took over my duties. He handed Isabella a cup of coffee, and she took a slow sip, her expression unchanged. There was an extra cube of sugar in it, but she didn't say anything. She just took that one sip and set the cup aside. During the preparations for the morning meeting, there was another small mishap. Luckily, she was already familiar with the key points for the upcoming negotiation, so it didn't turn into a major disaster. The office felt a degree colder than usual, and the humidifier was off, making her throat feel a bit dry by the end of the day. It was hard to pinpoint any single major issue, but there was a lingering sense that things were just slightly off. For the first time, Isabella found herself thinking of me. She rarely thought about me because I had a way of doing things so seamlessly that you wouldn't even feel my presence. Yet everything worked perfectly. She frowned again, the second time that day because of my fiancé. She had lost her chief secretary because of this woman. I spent the entire day lying around at home, but after a full day of contemplation, I still had no clue what direction my life should take. I felt like a ship lost in the middle of the ocean, unable to find its bearings. So, the next morning I went back to work as usual. When I got to the office, Daniel cautiously approached me and whispered, "Isabella didn't seem to be in a very good mood yesterday. She only took one sip of the coffee in the morning, and last night's cup is still sitting on her desk." I dipped my finger into the cold coffee, tasted it, and instructed him, "There's one too many sugar cubes. It needs exactly 3. Any more or any less won't do." I demonstrated the entire coffee-making process for him again while he watched closely. As soon as the fresh coffee was ready, Isabella arrived at the company. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, But it seemed like the corners of her lips were turned up slightly more than usual today, and her eyes held a different, unreadable glint. Handing over my responsibilities was far more complicated than I had anticipated. I had taken on so many different roles over the years that transferring all of it was no easy task. Besides, Isabella was never an easy person to please. Every little detail of her professional and personal life required careful instruction. I grabbed a notebook and began jotting down everything, from the smallest tasks to the most significant ones. This inevitable delay meant that my original plan to finish the handover within a month was pushed back, leading to the one task I wanted to avoid at all costs: picking up Julian from the airport and taking him to the old family estate. I had a bit of a crush on Isabella, and the thought of meeting her fiancé made me feel a profound sense of guilt, even though I had never acted on my feelings. Julian was dressed in a moon-white suit with a strikingly valuable piece of jade hanging around his neck. He was the type of man who stood out in any crowd, carrying an air of innate nobility. I put on a professional smile and approached him. "Julian, Isabella asked me to pick you up." On the way to the estate, Julian asked many questions about Isabella. It was understandable. Getting engaged to someone he barely knew must have made him uneasy. I could sense his anxiety, so I tried to reassure him warmly. "Isabella is a great person, Julian. You don't need to worry. You can always reach out to me if you ever need anything." He looked grateful, and we chatted for the rest of the drive until we reached the old house. Originally, I was supposed to just drop him off and leave, but the old man, Isabella's grandfather, called me back inside. He was known for his iron fist in the business world, and even in his 70s was still sharp, with piercing eyes. "Leo, where is Isabella?" he demanded. Isabella hadn't come to the old house. Keeping my expression neutral, I replied cautiously, "There's some urgent business at the company. Isabella might be a little late." The old man scoffed coldly, but graciously allowed me to leave to go and fetch her. I had seen him discipline Isabella before, using a harsh method that had left scars still visible on her back to this day. Once I was outside, I started calling Isabella in a hurry. Thankfully, she picked up on the third ring. I asked her urgently where she was, but she didn't reply right away. After a moment, she called my name, Leo. Her voice sounded muddled, as if she had been drinking, and I could hear the strong sound of ocean winds in the background. I thought I knew where she was. When I arrived, I found Isabella leaning against the large rocks by the shore, with a few empty cans of cheap supermarket beer beside her. Her hair was tousled in the night wind. She heard my approach and lifted her eyes, her gaze seeming clouded yet sharp at the same time, as if she was drunk, but perhaps not entirely. "You're here," she said. "Hang on, I'll be done soon." Isabella lightly patted the spot on the rock beside her, gesturing for me to sit down. "Let's talk." The old family estate was not far from the cliff by the sea. At night, it was brightly lit, yet it retained an ancient charm because of its traditional pavilion and tower design. Isabella suddenly asked, "Is it pretty?" My gaze lingered on her elegant jawline for a moment before I instinctively answered, "Pretty?" My face turned red, but she didn't seem to notice. She just continued, "But it's actually a tomb on the inside. What's the point of having jade halls and golden horses when it's just full of bones?" She spoke the words with a faint smile, but there was a profound seriousness in her tone. Rumor had it that the family's founding was not entirely clean, lingering in legally gray areas for years. Now, it was in a period of transition. I had been with her for 8 years, watching as she gradually took full control of the company amidst countless underhanded battles, weathering storms of blood and thunder that were invisible to outsiders. Does she get tired? I wondered. And are you happy? The question rolled off her tongue. She suddenly smiled, but didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me and said, "Your fiancé isn't the right fit for you." I was stunned by her comment, but she didn't elaborate. She just nodded and apologized. "Sorry, I overstepped." She finished her drink and then stood up. In that moment, she was the same dignified, untouchable Isabella as ever. On the way back, I kept thinking about what she meant. My thoughts circled back to the question of why, over a decade ago, a young girl like her would be standing on the rooftop of a dilapidated building all alone. But it was no longer my concern. I was leaving. From now on, mountains and rivers would separate us, and I might never see her again. The day I finally left was a rainy one. It was that kind of persistent drizzle that seemed as though it would never end. I sat at my desk, silently packing my personal belongings into a box. I had been at this very spot for almost 10 years, growing from a clueless 20-something into someone who could hold their own in a demanding world. I knew that every morning at precisely 9 o'clock, the sunlight would hit the small cactus I kept on my desk. I also knew that if I stood on my tiptoes, I could just catch a glimpse of Isabella through the gap in her office blinds. I had wandered through life leaning on these small, secret comforts, but now it was time to move on. I had spent 8 years of my life repaying a debt, and now Julian would be there to take care of her in the years to come. Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of sadness. I smiled and tried to reassure him. It's not like we'll never see each other again. But in my heart, I knew we probably wouldn't. This city held too much pain for me, and it was time for me to leave it behind. As I turned to go, I felt a sharp pang of regret for not being able to see Isabella one last time, even after I had purposely delayed my departure for as long as I could. After leaving, I caught up on years of lost sleep at home, sleeping so deeply it felt like I was dead to the world. I bought some liquor, cranked up the television volume, and put on a comedy. I laughed until I felt like a fool, and afterward I just sat on the floor, staring blankly into the dark, empty room, feeling completely and utterly lost. As a kid, my biggest wish was to do well in school so that my parents wouldn't argue. After my dad left, my only wish was to earn lots of money so my mom could continue to live. When my mom passed away, my wish was to become Isabella's best and most reliable assistant. Her happiness meant my happiness. But now, I was suddenly directionless. As I was zoning out, the doorbell rang. Looking through the peephole, I saw Isabella standing there. In my panic, I opened the door, only to realize I was wearing a ridiculous pair of rabbit-themed pajamas. It was too late to back out, so I invited her in, trying my best to muster a professional smile. Isabella was calm, a stark contrast to my flustered state. "I tried calling," she explained. "There's an urgent document, and I couldn't find the backup file. I was just in the neighborhood." Her cheeks flushed red for a brief moment. I quickly put on my professional smile. "Of course, Isabella. Have a seat. Let me find it for you." As I searched through my files, Isabella sat politely on my couch, her eyes fixed on me, which made me feel incredibly uneasy. The more anxious I got, the harder it was to find the document. Isabella smiled and reassured me. "Take your time." Then she asked, "Doesn't your fiancé live here?" Instinctively, I lied again. "She's coming back tonight." It took me nearly half an hour to finally sort through the documents and hand them to her. She took them, and then just stared at me. Just as I was about to speak, she gave me a smile that was warm, but also seemed to widen the distance between us. "I'm getting married soon," she said. "I can't seem to find the right person to handle the arrangements. Could you help, Leo? Payment will be as usual." Without even thinking, I nodded. After that nod, Any other words I might have said got stuck in my throat. After that day, I returned to help with the preparations for Isabella's engagement. I thought that perhaps witnessing her marriage firsthand would finally give me the closure I needed. In an attempt to make it up to Julian for my own secret feelings, I went the extra mile to ensure the engagement party would be perfect. Yet, Isabella was often preoccupied and only contacted me to relay instructions. She seemed completely detached, as if it wasn't even her own event. Julian, on the other hand, looked more downcast with each passing day. During a suit fitting, he looked at me with an almost pleading expression. "Leo, could you please ask her if she's coming today?" Though professionally I shouldn't have gotten involved, the look in his eyes made me place the call. When she answered, Isabella's voice was hoarse, and the background was noisy, a clear sign she had been drinking. I was about to hang up, but then I remembered Julian's sad face, so I cautiously said, "The suits have arrived. Will you be coming to the house?" A long silence stretched over the line, but then she finally replied, "Sure, pick me up." I wasn't sure why she needed a ride, but I obliged, rushing to her location. The gathering she was at had just ended, and Isabella was lying on a couch, tipsy. I knelt beside her and gently called her name. "Isabella. Isabella." She suddenly looked up, her gaze so piercing it left me stunned, but just as quickly it softened again. It was likely just my imagination. I helped her up and towards the car. She drifted to sleep almost as soon as we were inside. Watching her through the rearview mirror, I took the rare chance to observe her openly, which led to a guilty conscience about Julian, forcing me to look away. I repeated a mantra in my head for mental clarity. This uneasy feeling gnawed at me, and trusting my gut, I assessed that something wasn't right. A black SUV had been tailing us for the last half hour. "Isabella! Isabella!" I tried to rouse her, but she didn't stir. With no other choice, I sped up. The SUV did too. The two cars raced down the coastal road. The other vehicle was clearly modified, as it kept pace with me regardless of my speed, until it finally rammed into our car, then vanished into the night. With a deafening crash, the car rolled over. I was grateful that my quick steering at the last second had prevented us from plunging into the sea below. The air was filled with a metallic, bloody mist, and my head was spinning badly. I struggled to crawl out from the gap in my seat. Isabella was trapped behind her car seat, but she had finally opened her eyes. She tried to free herself, but was pinned by the crumpled car frame. I found a crowbar in the car's trunk and, using every bit of physics knowledge I could recall, tried to pry open the car door, but it wouldn't budge. The gas tank had tipped over, and fuel was spreading everywhere. There was a faint smell of burning smoke coming from the back of the car. The more urgent the situation became, the clearer my mind became. Fear and panic were useless now, so I pushed them aside. My only thought was to get Isabella out. Flames were spreading, and the car could explode at any minute. Isabella looked at me and said, "The salary I pay you isn't worth risking your life to save me, Leo. Just go. The car is about to blow." I was already incredibly stressed, and her constant talking wasn't helping. I snapped at her, "Shut up!" For some reason, Isabella suddenly laughed, and I didn't have the time to figure out why as the flames kept spreading. At some point, I cut my hand, and blood dripped onto the ground. Using every last bit of my strength, I finally managed to get Isabella out of the car. I supported her as we slowly but surely walked away. Not long after we had cleared the vehicle, the car exploded, lighting up the night sky in a fiery glow. I was thankful that I was strong enough and had enough endurance to save both of us. I heard the faint sound of an ambulance siren in the distance, and suddenly, all of the exhaustion from the ordeal hit me at once. I blacked out. Isabella woke up before I did. When the car crashed, I had instinctively turned the wheel toward myself, taking the brunt of the impact. She was now sitting beside my hospital bed, and it seemed as though she was truly seeing me for the first time. Isabella had been abandoned by many people in her life. Once, as a child, she and her father were kidnapped. The escape boat could only hold one person, and her father left her behind without a second thought. No matter how much she cried or screamed, she watched that boat get farther and farther away. Her mother had promised never to leave her, but she ended her own life with a rope. People constantly walked into Isabella's life and then left just as quickly, always leaving her behind. But the man in front of her, who had every reason to abandon her, hadn't. She had always prided herself on her ability to see through people, but she didn't know what this man wanted from her. What did he want, she wondered. It felt like waking up from a vivid dream. Isabella was looking at me, lost in thought, when I opened my eyes. My heart sank. Did she know my true feelings for her? Isabella watched me silently, and our eyes met. My palms were sweaty, as if I were awaiting a final judgment. "Why did you save me?" she asked. My brain spun quickly, and in the next second I replied with a forced smile. "Isabella, I'm a gambler. The gratitude of a company president isn't something you come by every day." Isabella frowned, silently evaluating the truth in my words. Then she asked, "What do you want?" In her world, not wanting anything meant you wanted the most, and an exchange of interests was the only thing that made sense to her. I thought about what would be worth risking my life for, something that would also ease her conscience. "I want 1% of the company's shares," I said, "enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life." Isabella's frown loosened. I knew I had made the right move. She smiled. "Shares are iffy. A storefront in a prime downtown location might be better, don't you think, Leo?" I smiled too. A store worth millions. "Thanks, Isabella." We both got what we needed, and now Isabella wouldn't have to feel guilty. She stood up to leave and said, "Rest well, Leo, and don't worry about the engagement." I stayed in the hospital for a whole week. The day I was discharged was also the day of Isabella's big engagement party. My phone was flooded with news about the union of the two powerful families. The venue was decorated like a fairy tale, with roses everywhere. It was nice. Bridges to bridges, roads to roads. I had repaid the debt I owed, and I had gotten what I deserved in return. But why did I still feel a little bit sad? I wandered the streets aimlessly and ended up at a bar. Over the years, I was always the one cleaning up after everyone else's parties, so I rarely drank. I didn't particularly like it either. They say a drink can ease your sorrow, but the alcohol was just bitter. So bitter it made me cry. My tears mixed with the drink, making it both bitter and salty. Before I completely lost consciousness, I managed to order a service to get me home safely. At the engagement party, Isabella received a call. It wasn't a planned one, but it was from my phone. It didn't matter. She just needed any excuse to leave the party, and the reason itself wasn't important. Upon arriving at the bar, a young delivery guy in a blue vest quickly approached her. "He asked me to take him home," the guy explained, "but he didn't give me an address, so I just called the top contact on his phone." He glanced nervously at Isabella. "You're not his boss, are you? He won't give me a bad review, right?" Isabella took me from his hands, reassuring the worried young man. "Don't worry, he won't. I'll handle it from here." Supporting me as they walked out, she found that I was restless, poking her face and pulling at her hair. I seemed genuinely drunk. They say you're honest when you're drunk, and Isabella decided to test that theory a bit. "Why did you come to my side?" she asked. I furrowed my brow, thinking hard, then gave a silly smile. "To repay a debt." Isabella asked again, "Repay what debt?" "A debt of life-saving." Isabella continued her questioning. And how do you plan to repay this debt? Give her the best of everything in this world. Why give her the best of everything? Because I love her. Isabella had taken a course on interrogation techniques in college. The idea was to follow the person's logic and lead them toward the question you're actually interested in. She thought she might uncover some hidden motive, but she never expected this answer. He loves her. Leo loves her. Isabella kept glancing at me, a silly smile still plastered on my face. I seemed truly drunk. A lot of people had professed their love for her over the years, and she had seen every kind, from the passionate to the gentle. But she'd never seen this before, the kind of love that was kept hidden deep in someone's heart for years. Why was there no trace of a woman in my home? Isabella pondered if she could truly trust me. It seemed Leo was ready to risk everything for love. The next day, I woke up with a pounding headache, feeling groggy from the previous night's drinks. I vaguely remembered having a dream, but the only thing I could clearly recall was Isabella's dark, intense eyes. Why was I dreaming about her again? Dreaming about another man's wife seemed incredibly wrong to me. For a long time, I forced myself to ignore any news related to the company. I traveled aimlessly, hopping off trains in random places and exploring different cities. I met with people, assessed their situations, and ranked them for potential donations. Sometimes I wondered, maybe my mom had wanted to live. If someone had been there to help her, could things have been different? There are too many people in dire situations in the world. I could only help the ones I saw with my own eyes. When I finally heard about Isabella in the news again, it was about the bankruptcy of her company. On the cover of a magazine, there was a split photo of Isabella and Julian, with bold red words emblazoned across it. Marriage fails. What's next for the company? I became anxious and immediately called Julian. He sounded sorry, but was only able to sigh. Leo, you know I never married a person, just a family. I'm powerless in this situation. After the initial panic subsided, my mind started to piece things together. Something didn't add up. I realized that maybe this was all Isabella's doing. The company had looked thriving and successful on the outside, involved in every industry, but it was full of hidden crises underneath. I had tried to warn her about them before, but she had always brushed me off. I thought she had other plans, but it turned out she had intended for this to happen all along. I recalled her drunken state by the sea, how she called the family home a cage. I felt that she needed someone beside her, just like on the day my mom almost jumped when Isabella held my hand so tightly. Whoever that person was, they needed to hold her hand now. With that thought, I rushed to the company headquarters, regardless of anything else. Instead of the usual bright lights, most of the building was dark. The remaining company funds had been used to compensate the employees. I waded through piles of abandoned desks and pushed open the door to her office. Isabella was cloaked in shadows as the city wind rattled the window blinds. She looked up at me, her eyes dark and lost in thought. I walked over and held her hand, unable to recall any of the words I had intended to say. All that mattered was holding her hand, just like she had once held mine. She thought back to her own mother, a poor woman who had been thrust into high society and eventually driven to madness. People had tried to shape her into an acceptable matriarch, insincere, calm, and strategic. Everyone had contributed to her mother's unraveling. People said she didn't have the fortune to handle the responsibility, but what if the rules themselves were flawed? The company had secretly engaged in shady dealings, and her mother couldn't stand it, ultimately paying the price with her life. Isabella was ready to face everything alone, letting the sins of the past fade into dust. But then Leo came. Was it because of love? Isabella saw him when he arrived, moving against the flow of the departing crowd to reach her, like a knight coming to rescue a princess. She found the idea amusing. The world surely had its fools, and he was one of them. He said nothing. He just held her hand tightly. The warmth from his hand seeped through to her cold fingers. It was only then that Isabella noticed just how cold her own hands were. She squeezed his hand back, moved by the tangible warmth, despite the wind and rain outside. I stayed with Isabella through the final liquidation of the company. I did media interviews, getting pelted with eggs by angry people. The company had many debts, and the public needed an outlet for their rage. It was a necessary reparation. The day the company officially declared bankruptcy, her father had a stroke. That night, Isabella took me to drink. It turned out to be her private apartment in the city center. Standing at the entrance, I felt hesitant. This didn't seem right. Were we this close? Or was this inappropriate? Isabella looked down, appearing uncharacteristically vulnerable. Had she been crying? My heart twisted in knots. I accepted the drink, and her eyes gleamed a bit. Why not? Accompanying someone through a difficult time wasn't beyond me. Isabella looked unlike she ever had before. Her shirt and tie were in disarray, her clothes crumpled. She was vulnerable, like she was melting into the night. She was usually so untouchable, always surrounded by people. Now, she seemed to have fallen from her pedestal. In her drunken haze, she repeatedly called my name, insisting that I respond each time. Her slightly hoarse voice resonated, each call echoing inside me. Suddenly, she leaned close, mere inches away. I saw the light casting delicate shadows over her eyelashes. "Leo, will you always be here?" she asked. I didn't answer, knowing that no one stays forever. Besides, what position did I have to promise to always be there? But she wouldn't let it go, demanding a response. Finally, with no other choice, I replied, "Yeah, I'll always be here." Isabella seemed satisfied with the answer. She was quiet for a while, staring at me with a furrowed brow, lost in thought. Then, out of nowhere, she suddenly exclaimed that she was hot and ripped open 2 buttons of her shirt with a hint of teasing allure. I never thought words like that would ever be associated with Isabella. I froze for a second, then forced myself to look away. Even though she kept saying she was hot, she kept sidling up close to me. My face felt like it was on fire. I thought to myself, this winter sure is hot. With a final burst of self-control, I managed to put some space between us. She gave me a puzzled glance and went back to drinking, soon becoming completely smashed. In her last conscious moment, she looked at me for a long time, her eyes showing a hint of encouragement. Why encouragement? After getting Isabella settled for the night, I went home but spent the entire night wondering why she would encourage me. The next day, Isabella called to thank me for taking good care of her. I chuckled awkwardly and politely replied, "It was nothing, Isabella." There was a pause on the line, then Isabella gritted her teeth and said my name. "Leo, you really are something." She hung up before explaining what she meant, leaving me utterly baffled. The company was gone, and I figured Isabella and I had no reason to meet again. It had been days since I last saw her, but then she showed up at my door, tipsy and knocking loudly. As soon as I opened it, she collapsed into my arms. I used all my strength to get her to the couch, and as I tried to leave, she pulled me down, and I fell into her arms. We were so close. She looked at me seriously and softly called my name, Leo. A simple name became something so beautiful coming from her lips. In that moment, her world was just me, and my heart started racing uncontrollably, closer, just a little closer, until finally, everything after that was a blur. Everything spun out of control. My self-restraint burned to ashes. The next morning, I stumbled out of my bedroom in a panic. Halfway out the front door, I realized this was my own house. I stayed outside until dusk, then nervously pushed the door open. The light suddenly flicked on, and there was Isabella, still here, looking at me with a smirk. What? Not going to take responsibility? I froze on the spot, not knowing whether to stay or leave. Let's talk. I had meant to tell her not to think too much about last night, that it was just a drunken lapse in judgment, but she cut me off with a look of exasperation and said, "You're not good with words, so let me speak first." Isabella looked so serious, more so than even on the day the company went bankrupt. Her seriousness made me nervous. "Leo, you think too highly of me. I'm just an ordinary person with all the usual flaws." I shook my head, wanting to say it wasn't true, but she continued. "I know your head isn't clear right now, and deciding something now is unfair. But I'm afraid if you have time to see who I really am, you won't like me so much. Whether it's gratitude or admiration, you made the first move. You can't just leave after that." Isabella pulled out a ring from somewhere, looking at me expectantly. "So, Leo, will you marry me?" My mind was a complete mess, and before I knew it, I had nodded. The ring was on my finger. "Did you bring your ID?" she asked. I nodded instinctively, and Isabella smiled. "Then let's go." "Where to?" "To the courthouse." We became the last couple to register at the marriage registry that day. When we came out, it was twilight, and the sunset was gorgeous, painting the entire sky red. At last, all the wild thoughts and grievances that had plagued me for years finally settled.